you here because we're talking to Mary Jean Chan and Alycia Pirmohamed about pamphlets, and particularly about Hinge, the Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice for summer 2020, which is going to be great. This is a new jumper, thank you for noticing. I thought I'd dress up for you all tonight here because it's August, because it's a Wednesday evening, and here in Greater Manchester we've been locked down again. So we're back in what they're calling a local lockdown, which means that we can't meet people in our garden or in our house, but I can meet people in a beer garden designed like a house. Also, sex is banned apparently under the new lockdown rules, but there you go, you learn something new every day. What else is new since last time we spoke? I got this, which is I think quite wonderful. This broadside of a Tom Gunn poem that was given out at a reading he did in 1992, because I've been doing what all of us do, I think, during lockdown, which is get drunk and buy things on eBay. So that's what I bought most recently, this kind of beautiful broadside of a Tom Gunn poem. So that's there. Patricia's still here at my feet. She will come and join me in a second, I'm sure. She's just very shy today. She's feeling sad about the return to lockdown. It's great to see so many people here again. It's going to be another great episode. I've been really, really excited about this episode for quite a long time, and really looking forward to it, because I think Hinge, the pamphlet that we're going to be talking about today, is just extraordinary. Patricia barks in agreement that it's extraordinary. It's one of the best pieces of new writing I think I've read in a long, long time, and so I'm really excited to talk to you about that this evening. I should tell you as well that if you're new to the Poetry Book Society, if you're not sure what it is, if you're watching for the first time, I kind of explain every so often what it is that the Poetry Book Society does. So I'm one of the selectors for the Poetry Book Society alongside Sinead Morrissey, and between us we look at all the books that are submitted that are coming out in this country in different quarters. So we do it by seasons. We've just finished doing the winter season, which we'll be announcing shortly, I think, and also we've chosen the autumn books, and the autumn books have been announced. And so if you join as a member, currently the cut-off is the 15th of August, but if you join the Poetry Book Society by the 15th of August, that means that you'll be in on the autumn mailing, and depending on the kind of layer of membership that you choose, you'll either get the choice, which is David Morley, or you'll get David Morley as the choice plus all the recommendations as well, who are Nina Mingya-Powell, Sean Borrowdale, Kate Miller, Mervyn Taylor, Rachel Long as the wildcard choice as well, chosen by Anthony Anoxagorou. So incredible amount of exciting books. And the pamphlet choice for autumn 2020 will be announced in a few weeks. It's always announced slightly later than the books, but pamphlets is what we're here to talk about. I think pamphlets are a brilliant thing. Poetry pamphlets are something that I always want to champion and always want to celebrate. I sometimes talk about them, certainly to my students, as being the kind of like the EP before the full album almost, and so a kind of testing ground for new poets. I did 3 pamphlets when I first started writing poetry, and they were published by Red Squirrel Press, who are a great little pamphlet press based up north, and they were a chance for me to sort of try things out. I wasn't as accomplished as the poets that we're going to hear about tonight. I was still kind of floundering around and making mistakes, and I think pamphlets offer a really interesting space to do that. But I think that's really only half of what pamphlets do. I think one of the really interesting things that we've seen happen in poetry in the last sort of half decade, maybe full decade, is that pamphlets have become this kind of really prestigious thing. They've really grown in recognition. There's the Michael Marks Award now. They're reviewed much more regularly in places like the TLS, and they've become not just a place for new poets to try things out, but also for established poets to return to as maybe a stopgap between collections, or to try out something kind of niche, or like a concept album almost. So there's a kind of part of pamphlets where we might see them as that EP, like I say, before the full album, but I think there is also a part of pamphlets that have become almost like a concept album, or that stopgap, like I say, that rest for poets between different collections. And so I've got in my study, I was going to get them out, but I didn't have time, just kind of boxes and boxes of pamphlets, because I think they're an incredible thing to collect, both so that we can kind of boast that we read these poets before they became really well known and really famous, and kind of got took up by the big publishers, but also because I think they're an incredible record to have of the longevity and the entire journey that a poet can do. And I think one of the great things that the Poetry Book Society has always done is to champion pamphlets and really to celebrate the art of the pamphlet in that pamphlet choice, which I think is a really important thing. And over the last few years, I think because of that resurgence of the pamphlet, because the pamphlet is becoming a really exciting kind of new forefront of the new frontier, of poetry, I think that we've seen a lot of new kind of poetry pamphlet presses emerge. And I think perhaps, Broken Sleep Books, who this last quarter got a Poetry Book Society recommendation for the translation. They've been doing really exciting pamphlets through both through Broken Sleep Books and through a kind of mini-series they've been doing called Legitimate Stack. And I think of Ignition Press, who we're kind of really talking about, I think, this evening, who are based out of Oxford Brookes University, who not only published the work of the pamphlet Summer Choice, Alycia Pirmohamed, who I've got here in my hand, but also of Mary Jean Chan, who, before she went on to publish that astonishing debut collection with Faber, had a pamphlet with Ignition Press, which was just a quite remarkable, again, kind of arrival and declaration, I think, of poetic intent, which is also what Alycia's pamphlet feels to me like as well. And so I think that what I'm excited to do tonight is, Patricia is excited, but she's asleep, but that's all right. That's all right. Don't take it personally. She's had a long day. She's been with the excitement has been building up to this, and then it gets too much for her. She falls asleep, much like me. I can't last much past 8 p.m, so she's just gone kind of an hour earlier than me, but she might wake up in a bit. I've made my boyfriend sit outside because he finishes work at 7 and he would be getting home about 7:30, and then the dog would go mad. So my boyfriend's locked outside until 8 p.m, so don't worry, there'll be no interruptions. And so the way that tonight's going to work is almost like the kind of hybrid episode that we did last time about the wildcard choice with Anthony Noxagoru and Wayne Holloway Smith. We're going to first of all talk to Mary Jean Chan as one of the selectors of the pamphlet choice for the Poetry Book Society, and just get an insight into what that kind of process is, kind of what happens with that, what thoughts go into kind of choosing a pamphlet, what makes a pamphlet stand out when there's so much great work about, and then into the specifics of Hinge, the Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice for summer 2020. And then about 7:30, we'll say goodbye to Mary Jean, and I'm going to bring in Alycia, and we're going to talk to her about that choice pamphlet, Hinge. We're going to think about some of the language of it, some of the form of it, and more importantly, I think, Mary Jean, how dare you? That's my story and not Patricia's. No, that is at last Patricia snoring. She's very loud. Imagine sleeping in bed with her every night. We're going to hear Alycia read some of the poems as well, which I am very, very excited about too. And so we'll kick off about 7:30 with a reading from Hinge, and then we'll go through with some chat. And as always, I got my glasses cleaned yesterday. I was saying this earlier during the preview. I went for an eye test and they cleaned my glasses, and it's like I've had laser eye surgery and I can suddenly see. Because I've never really known how I should be cleaning my glasses, so I occasionally just kind of rub them on my jeans, whereas now they've been professionally cleaned, I can see again. So I can see the comments kind of at the bottom of the screen as you're typing. I can engage with that. And so probably about 7:45, about 7:45, we'll invite questions. And if anyone's kind of got anything they want to throw in, anything they want to ask of Alycia, that would be the time to do that. So hopefully, be thinking of some questions, and hopefully you'll be able to respond as we're going through. So I think what I'm going to do now is invite Mary Jean Chan in. And we know Mary Jean Chan, of course, as the author of Flesh, which was published by Faber last year and won the Costa Prize for poetry last year, and was nominated for just about every other prize ever invented, I think, in poetry. And I haven't got time to list them all because then we'll run out of time on the live Instagram feed. But it's one of the, I think, most important and defining collections of the last 10 years in poetry. Many of you will have read it already, and I'm incredibly fortunate in this role at the Poetry Book Society that one of my colleagues in kind of choosing things is Mary Jean, and Mary Jean, alongside the great Nick McCower, is in charge of choosing the pamphlets each season for the Poetry Book Society. And so I'm really interested, first of all, just in kind of what that process looks like for Mary Jean and Nick, kind of what makes a pamphlet stand out to them, and then also just to have a chat about Alycia's work in particular as well, before we bring her into the conversation. So those of you that have been watching all of these will know that sometimes this goes smoothly, sometimes this moment where we add someone else into the conversation leads to cataclysmic events in which I have to vamp for 10 or 15 minutes while we solve the technical problems, but we rehearsed earlier, and so I'm hoping that that will not be the case this time, and so I'm going to invite Mary Jean into the conversation, and hopefully that will work. I'm going to have a sip of tea.
Hi, Andrew.
That worked so well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Seamless transition.
That was a seamless transition. How is everything with you?
Yeah, everything's great. Takeaway, so just a night where we didn't have to cook, which was nice.
Excellent. That's always good. You're buffering slightly, Mary Jean. It's not
Okay.
the
Yeah.
best connection, but we try our best.
Can you hear me right now?
Yep, I can hear you. The picture's just a bit blurry, but I think that should be fine.
Okay. Yeah. I'll move if it doesn't seem to be working.
No, that's great. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I guess first of all, just kind of what is it like selecting these pamphlets for the Poetry Book Society, and kind of how you've been doing the role? Is it for 2 seasons now, I think, isn't it? We're both quite new to doing the choosing, but how have you been finding it?
Yeah, exactly. It's been kind of like a really lovely thing to be doing. I mean, I'm obviously very honored to be a selector because back then, 2018 had my pamphlet selected, and that was just such an honor. I remember receiving the phone call from Alan Buckley and just being so shocked that my pamphlet had been selected. But yes, so with Nick, I mean, it's a very sort of collaborative process. We each sort of choose our top 10 or top 5, as it were, and then we have sort of a phone call to discuss, which are our favorites, and then essentially, I think we usually come to the conclusion that we really love 2 or 3 of them, that we're very convinced by all 3, but then it becomes a choice of which is the one that we really think stands out just a little bit more maybe than the others. So that's been how we've been choosing the pamphlets.
And what is it, do you think, about a pamphlet? 'Cause I guess certainly I always read them slightly different to collections, or we expect something slightly different from a pamphlet, I guess. Kind of what is it that you think you and Nick are kind of looking for when you kind of read these pamphlets? What is it that makes one stand out, do you think?
I think something about what you were saying earlier about like poetic intention. I think that is quite a great way to sum it up in some sense, because some pamphlets kind of work really hard, and there's a sense that they're getting somewhere and that they're actually, striving and doing something interesting with language, but the whole thing might not cohere very well as a kind of poetic intention. You might feel like there are poems that actually don't do the job, or there are poems that could be taken out or replaced by something else. But I think the pamphlets that we are sort of instantly drawn to are ones that feel seamless, that there's a sense of throughout every single poem there is an intention that is clear, and that we know that there's a narrative arc that wants to take us from point A to point B. And I think that's something that Alycia's pamphlet does very well.
Definitely. I love that idea of a kind of narrative arc, and I think that's really true, isn't it? That some people, I guess particularly at the start of careers, using pamphlets, this is what I was doing anyway, to kind of to try out a lot of different things. And so my kind of very early pamphlets were quite mixed, in that a couple of the poems were okay, but then some of them weren't very good. And I was kind of ventriloquizing different poets who I liked, and I hadn't kind of found out what I was doing yet. And I guess one of the things that really does stand out about Alycia's pamphlet is it feels so, that it's arrived so kind of honed already, hasn't it? That it feels as though I'm reading a poet who has been kind of publishing for years, that it's a voice that I feel instantly secure in, I think. Oh, that was my first impression when I started reading it. Yeah,
definitely. I think I had this sense of, wow, the whole thing coheres really well. The use of language is consistent throughout, the tone is consistent. Not that the poems are the same by any means, there's formal experimentation, different forums, different kind of speakers as well, but there is a sense of, every single poem has been edited and looked at very carefully. So that definitely kind of really shone through, I think.
I think that's really true. And I mean, this feels certainly like, to me, and I mean, I'll discuss this with Alycia as well, a kind of pamphlet that feels to me definitely like the staging post towards what I think will be a very strong kind of first collection.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, I was thinking with pamphlets, as I was saying before, like, are you seeing kind of submissions in the Poetry Book Society when they come in from more established poets as well? Like, is that something that's happening as well, that we're kind of seeing, we get poets like this from the kind of early stages of a career, but also I've seen pamphlets from people who have maybe been publishing for years or have got many collections, and the pamphlet is a chance to just do something else, I guess.
Yeah, I think we have seen definitely some really strong submissions from people who we've read full collections from. And it is an exciting time, I agree. Like for the pamphlet, I think it did used to be seen as, it's always a stepping stone. It's never the finished product, if you will. But now there are poets, who've been publishing for years, full collections, and then they go back to the pamphlet, and it's just perfect because, that is, like, for example, I'm thinking of Liz Berry's, The Republic of Motherhood. I mean, that is absolutely exquisite, and I think it works so well as a pamphlet. Yeah.
That's a really good example of that, actually, isn't it? That wasn't a stepping stone towards something else. It was just a kind of a self-made and self-contained kind of project. And again,
exactly.
I think, and somehow, I guess with that one, it kind of helped kind of satiate people's appetite for a little bit as they were waiting for that follow-up to kind of Black Country as well, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was just saying, your pamphlet came out in 2018, that's right, isn't it? So that was kind of year before the collection came out.
Yes.
I often wonder this, did the process of putting a pamphlet together feel different to putting the collection together, or was one the kind of just the natural precursor to the second one?
I think with the pamphlet, it definitely felt more focused. Like I knew that, if you will, part of the narrative arc wouldn't be conveyed because I didn't have as much space. So I think I always intended it to be sort of a part of fleshing. So I got offered the pamphlet deal as a kind of surprise, if you will, because it was the first year of Ignition Press, and they were inviting submissions from people. And I hadn't expected to have a pamphlet before the book came out. So actually that was a wonderful way to kind of put together something that was coherent for the first time. And I did think it helped a long way to putting the book together because I worked with my editor, Alan Buckley. And I remember we spent 3 hours going through each and every poem. And I ended up changing the line breaks for like 3 poems quite drastically, and really rethinking quite a lot of the ways in which the poems tied together or not. So I think that was so crucial to then putting flesh together later on.
I think that it's interesting. I think that close editing of something. This isn't something I was going to ask about, but just because you mentioned it, I think that is so crucial, isn't it? Or that's certainly what I need still when kind of my editor looks at my work. And I often find, the amount of reading that we have to do of different books or pamphlets or poems in competitions, that you can tell when something hasn't had that close eye on it. And particularly new poets, I think, need that. They need someone to challenge them about that piece of punctuation or that line break, and they need someone to knock those things back and forth with, don't they? I think that feels like a vital part of the process that some people often forget is necessary.
Yeah, I agree. Because thinking about, I suppose, the process to getting a pamphlet, maybe, we've been submitting to magazines and journals and getting some acceptances here and there, but often the journals don't offer feedback. Right. So it's just a case of, oh, that poem's likable or someone enjoyed it enough to publish it. But the pamphlet is the first time that you actually get a chance to work with an editor closely. And actually, there were some poems that I was so sure were done, and Alan said, no, actually revisit the line breaks. And then I did. And it worked so much better after that.
It's having that push, isn't it, I guess?
Yes.
But then we must talk about Hinge. I mean,
yes,
there's so much to say about it, and as I said, I am just kind of, I have to read a lot of stuff for a lot of different reasons, but I am just blown away by this pamphlet. I think it arrives kind of fully formed and feels, in that cliched phrase, very fresh to me. Like I feel like I've not read this before. Like I've not read this voice before. I've not found this voice before. But I just wonder, was there anything particular that, in general, that kind of jumped out to you with this pamphlet that kind of attracted you and nicked to it?
I think for me, it was definitely Alycia's use of language. I mean, she's so sure-footed each and every image does something. You know, there's no wasted metaphor or imagery. And often they're very unexpected ones, you know. This idea of coming into the world, you know, half formed because she lives across different countries and has sort of different homes, and homeland is such a fraught thing. And it just it sort of reminded me of my first experience of reading Ocean Vuong's Night Sky with Exit Wounds. I had that same kind of, not that they write the same at all, but just that same sense of surprise and feeling that the writer's so alert to language and alert to the possibilities of the image. It just really kind of grabbed me, and I couldn't stop reading it. I think that's always a good sign.
Definitely. I think that's Ocean is such an interesting point to mention in this context, because actually I think that's really true, isn't it? That kind of the art of the unexpected image is there, and also a kind of a very gentle surrealism, a kind of depth surrealism, which is never kind of silly or daft, or never brings you out of the moment of the poem, but always just slightly surprises us, doesn't it? There's that kind of real kind of fizz in the language because of that, I think. Especially I thought with the animals that arrive in as well.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of her use of the elk, or just those images are the wolves, for example, and then mentioning, you know, language in relation to that. I think that's just unexpected. You know, it's not sort of a typical nature poem. It takes us elsewhere. Yeah.
And I mean, that idea of it being untypical is interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, it is, as you say, dealing with these kind of very big themes. And yet it seems to me to have found a way to do that to kind of ground things very much in the body, or kind of ground things very much, as you say, in the language, in the kind of form of the poem. So they're not necessarily poems that have kind of the title isn't the big subject of the poem somehow, but these things kind of come through almost by osmosis. And that seems to me I don't know how it felt to you, but that felt to me like that was one of the real kind of victories of the pamphlet as well.
Yes, exactly. It felt subtle, you know, but it just was so confident. I think a lot of the language felt very sensual, as you say. It's the language of the body, of the kind of the animalistic part of us, maybe. But it's also so intellectual as well. I think I'm really drawn to poets that combine the mind and the body. You know, that there isn't a sense that you have to be overly sort of theorizing about something, but at the same time, you know, it's knowledge that is both sort of known in the head, but also felt in the body. I think that's sort of what Alycia is great at conveying.
Brilliant. Yeah, known in the head, but felt in the body. And as you say, these incredibly intellectual poems, but that wear that learning lightly, don't they? Like, these are poems that have such a kind of propulsion in them as well, I think, aren't they? Like, they, as you said, you couldn't stop reading. Like, they just kind of pull us through, I thought, from poem to poem to poem. They're not dense in that sense. Like, they're not, I don't get kind of bogged down in them. There's just something really kind of electric about them, I think.
Yeah. I mean, actually, not to sort of bring you up, but Andrew, your first book, Physical, definitely that was how I felt as well reading it. You know, it's like, I feel like poets often, you know, it feels like you either have to choose to be a sort of a poet of the erotics of the body, of, you know, but actually I think the best poets do both. You know, it's kind of lived experiences that you're able to flesh out both, you know, through like images that are sort of keenly felt, but also very sort of intelligent. And
that's what we always hope for, isn't it? I think, as poets, and that's certainly what I feel in here. I mean, was there a particular? You mentioned the wolves poem and the elk as well. Was there a particular poem that you kind of really remember, or that kind of really stuck out to you with the pamphlet?
Let me see. I think it's the poem When the Wolves Appear. That was the one I was mentioning. It's just amazing lines like "Give me back my dark," you know, or you know, I want to say yes to get to the language, you know, that just kind of unexpected. Every night I open my mouth, every night my mouth is an orbiting elliptical no, you know, the idea of the mouth orbiting something, a question maybe. So kind of eloquent, but also very visceral at the same time.
And it's that control of that ability to control the lyric line and that eloquence against something, as you say, that feels visceral. That's just the right word, isn't it? And somehow those two things together, there's just this, it kind of makes them vibrate on the page somehow, I think, doesn't it? In a really interesting way. And it's a fascinating one, because you know, as we say, these animals keep appearing, don't they? So we've got the wolves, and there's the elk later on. There's the grasshopper on the tongue.
Yes, I love that one.
That's that kind of one of the final moments of the pamphlet, and it's a way of. I guess, I mean, I don't know how you felt about those animals. Like, they felt to me like a way of kind of bridging that kind of natural world and the physical self. That they were somehow a kind of that in between space somehow. I guess that allowed some of the things to be explored.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the grasshopper you mentioned at the very final poem, it's just this lovely, the short-horned grasshopper. I mean, the specificity of that, firstly, I really enjoyed. And then just thinking that it's on her tongue, ready to sort of hop away in a kind of very casual, whimsical way, but also ready to strike, maybe. It's just that the idea that maybe our languages are free, you know, that they don't have to be tied to certain places or spaces, that we can reinvent them. Like, just that felt like a very fresh image, very vital as well.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way of thinking. That's such a great way of thinking about it. That's brilliant. I mean, there's so many great kind of lines and phrases that we can quote, aren't there? Are there any others before we say goodbye to each other and I bring in Alycia? Are there any other kind of lines or moments that you want to pick out, Mary Jean?
Let me see. Oh, I did really like this one, and I mentioned it in the write-up, but she says that I am unable to follow the elk in their way, have mastered living by mastering letting go, which I think is really gorgeous.
Yeah.
You know.
I've written that down as well as something to chat to you about, because I just think that's one of those lines where you think, I wish I'd written that. It's so it just encapsulates everything, doesn't it? So kind of succinctly.
Exactly.
It's such a beautiful line. Such a beautiful line. Just give it us again. Read it out again, because it's so beautiful.
So the line is, I am unable to follow the elk in their way, have mastered living by mastering letting go.
That's just perfect, isn't it? I just think
it is.
It's so perfect. If I'd written that, I'd retire and just go and live on a desert. But I mean, thank you so much for choosing this pamphlet, because it's meant that it's kind of brought it to my attention, into my life, and it's great. I mean, we should shout out Ignition Press as well, because I think they're doing really great things with pamphlets at Oxford Brookes, and there's 3 more coming out this November, is that right? Or this autumn, certainly?
Yes.
Fantastic.
I think they're doing a great job, with sort of finding new work that is often quite different. You know, the poets never have the same style, often from different locales as well. So I do really like how they're curating their list.
No, absolutely. It's a really great list they're building there. So we'll look out for those new Ignition Press books later on this year. And we'll wait and see what the autumn pamphlet choice is going to be, because that should be being announced in the next few weeks, I think.
Yes. That's another great one. So I'm really excited.
Excellent. We'll have to get together again and talk about that. Thank you very much for joining us, Mary Jean.
Thank you, Andrew.
It's been lovely to talk to you. I'm going to, by the magic of Instagram, kind of move you out of the room and then invite Alycia in, I think. But thanks so much for joining us. And
thank you so much. Yeah, see you soon. Sorry about the technical issue just now. Thank you.
No, bye now.
See you. Bye.
Fantastic. So that was Mary Jean Chan telling us all about how they choose the pamphlets, and then just giving us a really wonderful insight, I think, into the way that the pamphlets, Alycia's pamphlet, is put together, and a way in which it is built. And I just really, how articulate Mary Jean is in discussing this pamphlet in particular, but just what pamphlets can do generally, I think is really exciting. And so I'm really delighted now that I'm going to invite Alycia Pirmohamed into the conversation. She's the author of Hinge, which is the Summer Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice for summer 2020. By the magic of technology, I shall find on the list. There we go. Invite her. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. I've never had the chance to listen to so many nice words said about my pamphlet for so long.
Oh, no, yeah, that must be quite a strange thing to sit through, I suppose. But no, I mean, I thought Mary Jean was just so eloquent as well in describing some of the things that I think are really happening in this pamphlet. I've got some things I want to chat to you about, but I wondered if you might start off by reading us a poem from it, if that's okay.
Sure. I thought I would start off by reading Hinge, the title poem, just because that seemed appropriate. Hinge. Tonight, I am all joint and animal dark. My heel blots out the moon, vanishes the small knot of light. And yes, I prayed today, verging into my bismillah before settling on the broken. I stoop into my longings, plot a seed in every corner. Last week, I titled another page with my body and surrendered each bending, splitting line of myself to the making. When we refer to plants, we call this positive phototropism, a body rivering toward the light. I want to river toward the light, want to lean my neck toward a thing until I, too, become ism, scientific and named into truth. Today, I walked through a dream that wasn't mine and thought of you waiting at the end of it, as if to gather me. And maybe that's just the kind of woman I am. No matter how many times I have the moon or find myself in a room without a window, I know Allah sees everything, every hand planting something new, every metaphor for the tree it becomes. And yes, I prayed today, but planting my palms together has never felt like blossoming up the side of a mountain. The only time these hands have ever flowered, have ever been used for something good, was that spring at Yamnuska, where we found a clear blue door of glacial water, and I walked right through your reflection.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that poem. That's such a great place to start with this conversation. I mean, I guess just first, how does it feel for this pamphlet to be in the world, and kind of what was that process for you of bringing these poems together into the pamphlet? Mary Jean kind of noted that it does have this kind of narrative arc, and so I guess were these poems that always felt as though they belonged together, or just what was that process of pulling it all together?
Yeah, I think what Mary Jean said was really apt about my process, actually, because the poems, there is a narrative arc, but they're built kind of through the imagery. I think is what I love playing with language so much, and I love the imagistic aspects of poetry, and so I think that's what really carried through the narrative of the collection, the sequence of the collection. But in terms of putting it together, it felt it came together so well because they were all poems that were sort of reflecting on an experience I had, or at least in some relation to, not directly all the time, about visiting Tanzania for the first time, Dar es Salaam, with my father, actually. And so all of the poems, like there was repetition in them that kind of worked together, things that reoccurred or things that like my mind wasn't meditating on, I guess. So that was sort of maybe thematically what prompted a lot of, if not the poem directly, like the selection of why that poem felt important.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I mean, it's great that I think we began with that with Hinge, because it strikes me that hinge as a word is such an important thing. It's such an important kind of word that feels like the really kind of central idea that's at work in a lot of these poems. And I was thinking about, these two states that are sometimes kind of hinged together, these kind of, I think both that, as we talked about with Mary Jean, this kind of connection between an emotional and a physical state of longing or absence. And so an absence that's felt physically in the body, but is also kind of felt emotionally. And a lot of these poems felt like, to me, an attempt to kind of bring those two things into conversation with each other. And I think of that phrase in one of the poems, someone who stepped into this world already in halves. And I mean, is that what I guess some of the poems felt like to you, an attempt to somehow bring that physical and that emotional state, if not together, then at least into conversation with each other?
Yeah, I think so. Um, I think maybe what from the conversation that you had with Mary Jane, maybe what was noticeable is that I love working with, nature, and I love using animals, for instance, or even particular landscapes as a way to reflect. And so I suppose it's sort of how the interior and exterior kind of come together, or how my observations kind of speak to my experiences.
Yeah.
But very, very much so through maybe a deer that's really present and then kind of disappears or dissolves, or maybe a body that seems really solid but then sort of can blot things away or can unravel. And yeah, kind of leave an impression that way.
Definitely. I mean, well, I wanted to ask about animals because, as you mentioned, they're so integral, I think, to a lot of what's happening here, aren't they? We get the wolves, but also how to say dark, and then there's the elegy with the two elk and the compass, and that line that Mary Jean said that I typed up because it's just astonishing. The elk in their way have mastered living by mastering letting go. And I guess just on a lot of poets kind of tune into this. On a technical level, what is it you think, what are the animals kind of allowing you to do in the poems? Or kind of what is it that they allow you to do you think? Or what is it that draws you to them, to use in the poems in that way?
I think lots of different things. My poems I feel like they are very emotional or like emotionally driven, but using kind of the animals is a way to keep that intimacy while still getting to withhold some things and not feel or not make the self so present or the speaker so present, while still having that chance to navigate the things that my poems want to venture into. But
So
I
it allows something. So I guess it's almost it's the chance to have something living that isn't the kind of the self necessarily, kind of in order to explore some of those kind of emotional things.
Yeah, and I think the selection of which animals appear is really deliberate in the sense that I was kind of born and raised in Alberta, Canada, so a lot of the imagery in the poems, I think they flicker through a lot of different landscapes, but the deer feel kind of like a central figure for that landscape and that time, and those experiences. Whereas in other poems, like water is really present, and whether that's like through crossing water or an image of distance, or perhaps even like coming together, and then so how to say dark kind of meditates on that, on those particular aspects.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, that notion of alongside the animals, the landscape itself feels like such an important kind of character and an important kind of part of all these poems that really comes through. And I guess I was wondering what for you the landscape brings to the poems. I mean, for me, there was something about there was a constancy to it despite changing geographies. So despite kind of different places that the poems might take me, the landscape itself might be different, but it was still the landscape. And so there was still a kind of anchor there for the poem to kind of stretch out into. And I just wonder kind of, how that began, how for you the landscape was kind of worked into some of the poems.
Yeah, I really appreciated what you said about the poems feeling kind of surreal, because often when I think about what I want my work to be or what I try to do, there is this element of like a surreal space or a surreal dimension where the landscape does act kind of like an anchor that you can return to, but sometimes the landscape is also a bit of part of the dream of the poem too. But I also think that I try to make my poems feel very placed, because sometimes the narrative, like I mentioned before, is very imagistic, and so maybe the landscape or the place of the poem is a way to bring that together as well, to provide some kind of grounding.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I mean, you can just talk about the poem so well, which is really great. And I just wonder, because one of the things, like me and Mary Jean were saying, that spoke to me in these poems is not only what they're saying, but just the electricity that seems to be in them. Like, you just read this pamphlet and then you get to the end and think, oh, no, I've got to read it again. Like, you kind of pulled through. And there's that one line that I kind of that I underlined: this is me driving straight into my own life. Like, just that sense of just kind of momentum that pulls us through all these poems, and yet they're so considered and kind of smart and thought out and constructed so well. And I just wonder, on a kind of as a poet, what does that process look like when you kind of approach the poem or approach the page? Do you already have a kind of sense of the subject of the poem, or a certain place, or do you just have a kind of voice that you're pursuing? Like, how do the poems kind of end up sort of falling out onto the page, I guess?
I think the poem, the line that you mentioned, is from Self-Address, the poem that is probably has the most, maybe not the most, but the most kind of a typical form in terms of like being very structured, I guess. Not typical, not the most, but just a structured poem where there's a set number of lines, kind of a set shape.
Yeah.
Whereas it took a while to get there for that poem, because like I said, I love to play with language, and I love to kind of just make things, I guess, like make scenes, and so the poem comes out kind of through that process, and the form then is very intuitive, but in a way that I then have to shape it after. So the form for me, I think, is the part that it requires the most revision.
Yeah.
It's like the hardest part, but I like to also try to keep some of those intuitive breaks in there as well, as part of the poem too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because sometimes there is, like, I was fascinated too just by the different kind of formal or kind of punctuation things that were happening. So there's the poem where we get, and people, once they buy the pamphlet and read it, will see, but we've kind of got the open kind of square brackets at one point in one. In some poems, we've got that kind of what I call a breath space, but we might just think as kind of white space within the line without punctuation. And then sometimes the kind of dash as well. And so the kind of em dash that joins two different thoughts. And so is that, as you're saying, something that comes kind of when you revise it, or is that intuitively kind of happening as the poems are happening?
I think the dashes themselves are probably more intuitive, just because I think they give me room to explore like vastness, like kind of move dimensionally, or break away from something that I was thinking in a way that's still joined, but elite, I guess.
Yeah.
So those kind of are maybe a bit more intuitive, but I think other punctuation is something that comes through the revision process.
Yeah.
In terms of the gaps in the whites, the did you call it breath space? I like
That.
I like that. In terms of like the breath space, I think it's a bit of both. Sometimes it'll feel right to create that breath, or in kind of a similar way that I spoke of in terms of the dashes, and to give that space when I'm trying to move somewhere, or maybe even just transform something that came before. Whereas other times, it's really considered, it becomes more of a device, I guess, to carry out a thought.
Yeah. And I was struck because you read Hinge to us at the start, and it just has that great line in it quite early on. It's that last week I titled another page with my body and surrendered each bending, splitting line of myself to the making. And just, I mean, again, beautifully kind of phrased, but that bending, splitting line of myself. And so one of the things that I was left with this pamphlet as I'd read it was that the poems themselves became a necessary process of trying to make sense of maybe a kind of fractured sense of self, or a kind of an uncertainty of geography or belonging, that the splitting line of myself to the making, that somehow poetry both was kind of complicit in that splitting and exploring it, but also might be the place where things might be understood or come back together.
Yeah. I feel maybe other people can relate, but for me, coming to poetry was a way, at least at the very beginning, it felt like a way that I could finally have a voice, just to say things, or to represent the world, or to represent an outlook that maybe I felt I didn't have before, but also a way to kind of, I don't know, bring together different complexities, like Hinge, for instance, is about, the line you mentioned is kind of self-referential, or like about making poems and how they can help you understand yourself, or reconcile certain things that you've been maybe questioning, which I had been. Like the poem is about like relationships. It's about growing into like yourself, but it's also about complexity of faith and spirituality, which is it's something that poetry really gave me a way to explore that, to voice those thoughts, and also I think I love the process of creating, and I love surrendering myself to that process too, which I think, I don't know, I think can sort of speak to that line as well.
Absolutely. And I'm going to kind of ask if anyone's got any questions to kind of throw in on the comments at the bottom. But I just, while people are thinking about that, I just wondered, I always hate being asked this question, so don't worry if there's not an answer. But if there were certain poets that you felt would be in the kind of ingredients list for this pamphlet, like I know you quote Banu Kapil in the kind of epigraph to the pamphlet, and I talked to Banu a couple of weeks ago, and the new book, How to Wash a Heart, which is just kind of astonishing. So, but I just wondered if there were any particular voices who you felt had kind of fed into the work.
Yeah, I think so. I really like Jenny's her eye level. Yeah, I think the way that she experimented with form was really great, and maybe, I don't know, like in terms of how much it fed into the collection itself, but I think it was a collection that felt really close to me, and that I just loved reading so much, that probably in that way fed into the work, just through my appreciation of it, and then also another collection I really loved, Aria Arden. And I think what it comes down to is just these works that, and a collection, like a poet that I really love, that I've been writing about a lot lately, and who I have talked to quite a bit while writing this pamphlet. But it was her first pamphlet with stuff that I really liked, was Katusha. Her work. She also has 2 pamphlets. So anyway, yeah, I think she's published with Bitter Melon Press as well, if you know that, probably. Yeah. And so I think it's just kind of poets that work thematically, like within the same vein that I do, but do so in a way that feels unexpected, or maybe has like a dreamlike quality, or has a lot of like reflections of nature in them. Elegy with 2 elk and a compass. In Jasper, Alberta, I pass through the widowed poplars. Evening hikes up its dark hems. Trees begin howling their elegies. when loosened from the thicket, 2 elk walk into my gaze. Here, in the gap between needle point and destination, there is an unkind earth that persists, even as lost petals down, leaving the poplars bare. Earlier that day, I had crossed the forest's bridges and stepped beyond its corridors. I had longed to find the hidden trail that led to the Valley of Roses. From the elk, I am expecting a lesson, as if Allah has approached me in the shape of a compass built from antler and vine. Their muscles tense. One rises into a gallop, widening the field. Its legs seize with strength, and I remain in the space left behind, the sudden nakedness of a northern forest. I am unable to follow. The elk, in their way, have mastered living by mastering letting go. Soon it will rain, and we will all wear our halos of mist.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for reading that poem. And again, that beautiful line that within that poem, but the whole thing is just fantastic. And I'm sorry that my sound went for a couple of minutes then. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if the weather changed or Patricia pulled like a lead out of the computer. I'm not sure, but I'm back. And it's been so great to chat to you about this pamphlet. Like, I just think it's quite remarkable. And I know you've just finished a PhD as well. So you've just kind of finished that and passed that, and that's all great. So I feel bad asking this question because I feel you deserve some time off. But I wonder, in terms of poetry, kind of what might be happening next, or kind of is there kind of working on another pamphlet or a collection, or just kind of seeing what happens for now?
Well, I've been writing. So part of my PhD was writing poetry as well. So I think it's just kind of revisiting poems that maybe need some more editing, seeing how they can work together. It'll be interesting because I think there's a lot of conversations between the poems I wrote for my PhD and the pamphlet, and maybe seeing how they can work together to put together a full-length manuscript. And then I will hopefully find a job other than that. Yeah, so yeah, basically continue. I think I'm going to take August and kind of relax.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you've earned that. That's fine.
And then maybe, I don't know, I'll see if I'd like to maybe continue an academic route. And I've really gone into writing some essays, like lyric essays as well. And I feel like my poetry is transforming a little bit too. So just seeing just experimenting with that as well.
Fantastic. And I'm just seeing a question that we can sort of have as the last question that's been asked in the chat, which is someone just saying, as we've been saying, there's real intimacy to these poems that they can look inwards, but they're also grappling with distance, and there's this vastness to them as well. And I just guess if you could say a little bit about how you see those two things kind of balancing within the work, that kind of looking inwards, that intimacy, but then that vastness and the distance that's there as well.
Yeah. I guess I see it as sort of a threading through. I think it happens within poems for sure, and I think it happens also with poems next to one another. Like some of the poems feel a bit more exterior or about the observation, and then some really narrow in and get very close or very interior. And I like playing with that. I like opening it up and then getting really close. I think coming back to that question of like loving poetry for what it can, like how many questions it can answer, and like some sort of truths, I guess, that you can find about yourself in it. I think there's also something to be said about like not revealing everything too. So like,
yeah,
like the poem is kind of creating a truth that maybe isn't so internal. And in those moments, it feels. I mean, maybe that's where like the animals come in, I guess.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Like
thank you so much.
Through them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer. That's really great. And just thank you again for for joining us. I've just been really honoured to be able to chat to you about these poems and be able to chat to you about this pamphlet. And thank you to Mary Jean for joining us as well. And so Hinge is out now with Ignition Press. It's the Poetry Book Society pamphlet choice for summer 2020. So get hold of it, read it, spend all of August reading it. That's your only mission for August. You almost buy a copy of this pamphlet and read it. So thank you to Mary Jean Chan for joining us. Thank you to Alycia Pirmohamed for joining us. Thanks so much. You've just been so insightful, and it's been beautiful to hear the poems read out loud as well. I'm sorry that I fell down a well of silence for a couple of minutes, but I emerged to save the day, so that's okay. Patricia's now kind of, so that's okay. So it's all going on at the end. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us. Poetry Book Society, if you join by the 15th of August, you get the autumn mailing with David Morley, Nina Minga Powell, Mervyn Taylor, Rachel Long, and you get 25% off all the books on the website as well. So thank you very much to Alycia, to Mary Jean, to you all for watching, and thank you to Patricia for spoiling herself at the end by barking at the window. There she is. There you are, Patricia. There she is. There she is, having a moment of fame at the end there. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye now, everyone.
Thank you.